The image is stuck in our heads, a man with a big brow and a bigger club, dressed in animal skins. He stands at the mouth of a dark cave, firelight flickers behind him. This is the caveman. It's the first picture we get when we think about our ancient ancestors. We see it in cartoons, movies, and museum dioramas. It feels true. So, did the first humans live in caves? The simple answer is no. The more complicated answer is that some later humans did sometimes, but it was never the whole story. The idea of the caveman is a huge oversimplification. It's a myth born from a simple truth. We find a lot of their stuff in caves. That's because caves are amazing time capsules. They protect things from wind, rain, and sun. A bone or a stone tool dropped in a cave might sit there for 100,000 years waiting for someone to find it. The same tool dropped on an open plain would get washed away, buried, or broken down. So archaeologists look in caves, and they find things in caves that create a powerful bias. We were looking for our history under the streetlight because that's where the light was. The real story of where humans lived is much bigger, messier, and more interesting. It's a story of incredible adaptability. To get to the bottom of this, we need to ask a different question first. Who are we talking about when we say the first humans? Human evolution isn't a straight line. It's a bushy tree with lots of dead-end branches. The story starts millions of years ago in Africa. Let's go back about 3 million years. We find hominins like Australopithecus, the family of the famous fossil Lucy. Were they human? Not like us. They walked on 2 legs, but they still had ape-like features. They were small. Their brains were small. They lived in a world full of big predators. A cave would have been a death trap. A cave is a den. It's a home for bears, hyenas, and big cats. An Australopithecus wandering into a cave would have been an easy meal. Their best defense was climbing. They likely spent their nights in trees, just like chimpanzees do today. They lived on the savanna, near patches of woodland. They were creatures of the open air and the forest edge. The evidence we have for them, their fossilized bones, is found in open landscapes near ancient lakes and rivers, not deep inside caves. So, the earliest hominins, the first upright walkers, were not cavemen. Let's jump forward a bit to around 2 million years ago. We meet a new character, Homo habilis, the handyman. This species is important because they were the first, we think, to consistently make and use stone tools. This is a huge leap. A tool lets you do things your body can't. It lets you butcher a carcass, cut plants, or defend yourself. Did Homo habilis live in caves? Probably not. The evidence suggests they were still very much on the move. They lived a nomadic life on the African savanna. They were scavengers following herds looking for opportunities. We find their simple stone tools and the bones they butchered near the shores of ancient lakes. These were likely temporary camps. Maybe they found a good spot, spent a few days or weeks there processing food, and then moved on. A rock overhang might have offered a bit of shelter from the rain. A grove of trees might have been a good place to rest. But a permanent cave home? It doesn't fit their lifestyle. And again, caves were still very dangerous real estate. The story gets more interesting with Homo erectus. This species appears around 1.9 million years ago. And they were different. They were taller, bigger-brained, and more like us. Homo erectus was a game changer. They were the first hominin to leave Africa. They spread across Asia and into parts of Europe. They were sophisticated toolmakers and effective hunters. And most importantly, they might have been the first to control fire. Fire changes everything. A fire at the mouth of a cave does 2 things. It keeps you warm, and it keeps predators out. Suddenly, a dark, dangerous hole in a rock becomes the safest place to be at night. The fire is a shield. It turns a predator's den into a human home. So, did Homo erectus live in caves? Yes, some of them did. One of the most famous Homo erectus sites is the Zhoukoudian cave system near Beijing, China. There, archaeologists found the remains of dozens of individuals, along with stone tools, animal bones, and what they believed were layers of ancient ash from controlled fires. For a long time, this was the textbook example of early cave dwellers, a community of Homo erectus living in a cave, using fire for hundreds of thousands of years. But even this classic story has been re-examined. More recent studies suggest the ash layers might just be natural organic deposits. The animal bones might have been brought in by hyenas, not humans. The humans themselves might have been the prey, not the residents. It's possible that Homo erectus used the cave entrance for shelter from time to time, but they didn't live deep inside it as a permanent home. The evidence is ambiguous. It shows they were in and around the cave, but it doesn't prove they were cavemen in the classic sense. Even with fire, living in a cave was just one strategy among many. Homo erectus populations in the vast open plains of Africa or the river valleys of Asia would have needed other solutions. They almost certainly built simple shelters out of branches and hides, but those structures are made of organic materials. Well, they rot, they disappear, the cave made of rock remains. Now we get to the hominins most people picture when they hear the word caveman. The Neanderthals, Homo neanderthalensis, they lived in Europe and Asia from about 400,000 to 40,000 years ago. They were tough, smart, and incredibly adapted to the cold of Ice Age Europe. And yes, Neanderthals definitely lived in caves. A huge amount of what we know about them comes from cave sites in France, Spain, Germany, and the Middle East. When archaeologists excavate a Neanderthal cave, they find a layered history of occupation. They find distinct hearths where fires were built again and again. Around these hearths, they find thousands of stone tools, beautifully crafted for specific jobs: butchering meat, scraping hides, working wood. They find the bones of the animals they hunted: mammoth, woolly rhino, reindeer, bison. These bones often have cut marks on them from Neanderthal stone tools. This tells us they were bringing their kills back to the cave to process and eat. The cave was a home base. It was a kitchen, a workshop, and a living room, all in one. Some caves were used for generations. Shenadar Cave in Iraq is a famous example. Archaeologists found the remains of 10 different Neanderthals there. One of them, an old man, had crippling injuries. He had a crushed eye socket that probably left him blind in one eye. He had a withered arm. He was deaf, and yet he lived to an old age. This suggests his group cared for him. They brought him food, they protected him. The cave was a place of community. It was a home where the vulnerable could be supported. Another individual in Shenadar was found buried with clumps of pollen, leading to the flower burial theory, the idea that his people had laid him to rest on a bed of flowers. While this theory is now debated, the fact that he was intentionally buried in the cave floor shows that the cave was more than just a shelter. It was a place with meaning, it was a place to live, and a place to die. So for Neanderthals, the caveman stereotype is partly true. They were masters of cave living. But it's still not the whole picture. Neanderthals were also nomadic hunters. They followed the herds. A cave might be a fantastic home base in the winter, but in the summer, they might have moved to open air camps closer to the migrating animals. We find evidence of these open air sites too. They are just harder to find and don't preserve as well. Also, not all Neanderthals lived in regions with caves. Those living on the Great Plains of Eastern Europe had to be more creative. They built shelters, and they used some surprising materials. This brings us to early modern humans, Homo sapiens. Our own species, we appeared in Africa around 300,000 years ago and started spreading across the world. And like the Neanderthals, we also used caves. In fact, we often moved into the same caves that Neanderthals had used, sometimes just a few thousand years after they disappeared. We find our own tools and our own hearths layered on top of theirs, but early humans took the idea of a cave as a special place to a whole new level. We didn't just live in them, we transformed them, we decorated them. This is the origin of the world's first great art galleries. Caves like Chauvet, Lascaux, and Altamira in France and Spain are breathtaking. Just deep inside, far from the living area at the entrance, our ancestors painted and engraved stunning images of animals. Horses, bison, mammoths, lions. These weren't just doodles, they are masterful works of art created by torchlight in the deep, silent darkness. Well, why do they do this? We don't know for sure. It probably wasn't just for decoration. These galleries are often in hard-to-reach places. Getting to them was a dangerous journey. It suggests these were sacred places. Maybe they were used for religious ceremonies or initiation rituals for young hunters. Perhaps they were a way to connect with the spirit world, to ensure a successful hunt. Whatever the reason, these paintings show that, for Homo sapiens, caves were not just shelters from the cold. They were places of deep spiritual and cultural importance. They were the first cathedrals. But even for us, the masters of cave art, caves were not the only homes. Most early humans, for most of human history, did not live in caves. They couldn't. Caves are a geological feature. They only exist in certain types of rock, like limestone. Much of the world has no caves at all. The vast continent of Africa, where humanity spent most of its evolutionary history, is not particularly rich in caves compared to Europe. So what did people do on the open savanna, the grassy steppes, or the river floodplains? They built shelters from whatever materials were available. These shelters have almost all vanished. Wood rots. Animal hides decay. Grass turns to dust. So the evidence is incredibly rare. But we have found some. In a site called Terra Amata in southern France, archaeologists found evidence of what might be some of the earliest man-made huts built by a pre-Neanderthal species perhaps 400,000 years ago. They found a pattern of post holes, suggesting an oval-shaped hut made of wooden saplings, with a hearth in the center. It was a simple temporary structure, but it was a home. Even more spectacular evidence comes from Eastern Europe. In places like Mezhyrich in Ukraine, archaeologists found incredible huts built around 15,000 years ago. The builders didn't have much wood because they were living on a cold, treeless steppe. So they used the bones of woolly mammoths. They created a circular foundation using dozens of massive mammoth skulls and jaws. They used leg bones and tusks to create a domed framework. Then, they likely covered this bony structure with animal hides. Inside, they had hearths for warmth and cooking. These were complex, sturdy homes that would have housed a family or a small group. Finding one of these is like finding a ghost. It's a rare glimpse into a whole world of architecture that has almost completely disappeared. It proves that early humans were not just passive users of the landscape, taking shelter where they could find it. They were active builders, shaping their environment to meet their needs. They were engineers. So, the real story is one of flexibility. Early humans were brilliant survivors. They lived in every imaginable environment, from the tropics of Africa to the frozen tundra of Ice Age Siberia. There was no one-size-fits-all solution for shelter. Their choice of home depended on the climate, the landscape, and the materials at hand. If you lived in a limestone gorge in what is now southern France, a south-facing cave was an excellent choice. It was a natural, pre-made structure. It gave you protection from the wind and snow. The sun would warm the entrance during the day, a nearby stream would provide water. A forest would provide firewood and game. In this context, a cave was prime real estate. But if you lived on the plains of East Africa, you needed a different strategy. You were constantly on the move, following the great herds of wildebeest and zebra. A permanent home made no sense. You needed something lightweight and portable, or something you could build quickly from scratch. You might have made a simple lean-to out of branches and grass. You might have slept in the open, around a protective fire. Your home was the landscape itself. Living in a cave also had its downsides, even a good one. Caves can be damp and dark. Smoke from a fire doesn't always ventilate well, leading to respiratory problems. And you were never truly alone. Cave bears, a species much larger than today's grizzly bears, hibernated in the same caves that humans wanted to live in. There is clear evidence of conflict. At Chauvet Cave, the one with the stunning paintings, there are bear skulls with fracture marks from human weapons and human remains with evidence of being mauled by bears. A cave wasn't a safe refuge you just walked into. You often had to fight for it and then defend it. The idea of the caveman sticks around because it's simple. It gives us a neat, easy-to-imagine picture of the past. But the past was not neat or simple. It was complex and varied. Our ancestors were not dumb brutes who just stumbled into the nearest hole in the ground. They were intelligent, resourceful, and incredibly adaptable people. They were problem solvers. The problem was, how do I stay safe and warm tonight? The answer could be a cave. Or it could be a hut made of mammoth bones. Or a simple screen of woven branches. Or just a good strong fire under the stars. The cave is not the whole story. But it is an important chapter. The evidence found in caves has taught us an immense amount about our past. The well-preserved bones tell us what our ancestors looked like and what they ate. The tools tell us about their technology and their intelligence. And the art, the magnificent, mysterious art, gives us a window into their souls. It tells us they were not just surviving. They were thinking, dreaming, and trying to make sense of the world. They were people just like us. So, when we ask if the first humans lived in caves, we see that the question itself is a bit flawed. There was no single first human way of life. For millions of years, our family tree included a diverse cast of characters, each with their own way of surviving. The earliest ones almost certainly did not live in caves. Later humans, like Neanderthals and our own species, were masters of using caves when they were available. But they were also masters of building shelters when they were not. The real defining characteristic of humanity isn't where we lived. It's how we lived. We survived because we could adapt, we could innovate, we could create solutions. Whether that solution was a perfectly shaped stone axe, the control of fire, a hut of bones, a painting of a bison, or the decision to make a home in the mouth of a cave, it was all part of the same human story. The story of finding our place in the world and then changing it to make it our own. The cave was just one of the first and most enduring places where we did just that.